Hatton Garden. July 16, 1913. 8:30 in the morning. Max Meyer breaks open 3 wax seals on a small parcel that has just traveled from Paris to London by ordinary registered post. Inside is supposed to be a string of 61 pearls so perfectly matched, so flawlessly pink, that jewelers across Europe called it the Mona Lisa of pearls. It took 10 years to assemble. Lloyd's of London insured it for £150,000, the largest jewelry policy the company had ever written. Meyer lifts the lid. 11 lumps of French sugar, wrapped in a torn scrap of a Paris newspaper. The seals were intact. The weight was right. Nothing about the parcel, from the moment it left Paris to the moment it landed on Meyer's desk, gave any outward sign that anything was wrong. And that is the part of this case that should unsettle you. The theft wasn't a smash and grab. It wasn't even, strictly speaking, a break-in. Someone had to know the exact weight of £150,000 worth of pearls. Someone had to reproduce Meyer's personal wax seal well enough to fool the man who used it every day. And someone had to know precisely which parcel, out of the hundreds moving through the postal system that week, was the one worth stealing. If global true crime told this way, evidence first, patient, a little obsessive about the small details, is what you're looking for, consider subscribing to Enter the Crime. 3 questions are going to drive everything that follows. How do you steal something without ever appearing to touch it? How does Scotland Yard build a case with no fingerprints, no forced entry, and no witnesses to the theft itself? And once the pearls vanish into London's underworld, how do you prove, forensically, in a courtroom, to a jury, exactly who did it? But to understand how we got here, we have to go back. Not to the morning of the theft. To the years before it, when a jewel dealer's reputation and offence's patience were quietly moving toward collision. Picture London in 1913. Georgian terraces. Gaslight giving way to electric. The British Empire near its territorial peak, and Hatton Garden, a short, unglamorous street running north from Holborn Circus in central London, already the beating heart of the country's diamond and jewelry trade. It still is today. In 1913 it was a place where fortunes changed hands on a handshake, where dealers routinely mailed gemstones worth more than most people's houses through the ordinary postal service, because the alternative, hiring armed couriers, felt, absurdly, like the greater risk. Couriers could be followed. Couriers could be robbed on a street corner. A plain brown parcel buried in a mailbag, officials reasoned, was invisible. That assumption is the hinge this entire case turns on. Keep it in mind. Max Meyer was born in 1859 and built his career from nothing, costume jewelry first, then semi-precious stones, then diamonds, then pearls, each rung earned through decades of trading on his word. By 1913 he was one of Hatton Garden's most respected dealers, and his reputation was, by his own account, his most valuable asset. He had spent years assembling this particular necklace, 61 pale, blush-pink pearls, matched so closely in color and luster that finding each new one to complete the strand sometimes took months. One large pearl at the centerpiece reportedly traced back to the royal family of Portugal. Meyer bought the finished necklace at a Paris auction for roughly £123,000 and insured it through Lloyd's for £150,000, worth, by some estimates, more than the Hope diamond. That summer, Meyer sent the necklace to his agent in Paris, Henri Salomons, to show to a prospective buyer. The sale fell through. Salomons packaged the necklace, sealed it with wax bearing Meyer's monogram, MM, and sent it back to London by registered mail, exactly as he'd done many times before. Now meet the other side of this story. Joseph Grizzard, known on the street as Cammy, known to Scotland Yard as the King of Fences, was born in 1867 to an Austrian Jewish family in London's East End. On paper, he was a legitimate diamond dealer with an office of his own. In practice, he was one of the most successful fencers in the country, moving stolen jewels through a network that police had never managed to pin on him directly, despite knowing exactly who he was. Grizzard's charm was, by every contemporary account, disarming. The kind of man who could sit through a police raid on his own home with a smile, and once famously fished a string of stolen diamonds out of the bottom of a bowl of pea soup after officers searched the house and left empty-handed. Grizzard did not act alone. James Lockett, a jeweler and burglar, was his closest collaborator. Simon Silverman was a diamond broker with an office only doors away from Maya's own, close enough to watch Maya's daily movements without anyone thinking twice about it. Lisa Gutworth, another diamond broker, rounded out the core of the group. Here is the quiet, procedural detail that makes this whole operation possible, and it is worth sitting with. Grizzard studied the postman. A man named W.E. Neville delivered mail on Maya's route, and Grizzard spent time befriending him, learning his schedule, the order of his deliveries, the rhythm of an ordinary working man's ordinary day. This wasn't a heist built on violence or speed. It was built on patience, on watching a routine long enough to know exactly where the one gap in it would open. Silverman, meanwhile, was tasked with something far more technical, producing a counterfeit of Maya's wax seal, precise enough to survive close inspection by the man who used the real one daily. 3 of those forged seals survive today in the collection of the Metropolitan Police's Crime Museum, physical, forensic proof, more than a century old, of exactly how far this gang was willing to go to make a substitution invisible. Everything was in place by the summer of 1913. The seal, the postman's schedule, the knowledge that a parcel from Paris, containing the most valuable necklace in the world, was due to arrive any day. Registered mail in 1913 moved on a predictable schedule. A parcel handed to a Paris post office in the morning would typically clear customs and arrive at a London sorting office by the following day. Grizzard's gang didn't need to intercept the necklace in transit across the channel. They needed exactly one window, the moment between the parcel reaching London and the moment it reached Maya's hands. That window belonged to Neville, the postman. Neville was bribed, reportedly around £400, a substantial sum for a working postal carrier at the time, to divert the parcel. Instead of delivering it to Maya directly, on July 16, 1913, he brought it to Silverman's office, just doors from Maya's own. Inside that office, the gang worked fast but not recklessly. They opened the parcel, removed the necklace, and replaced it with 11 lumps of French sugar, weighed, by all accounts, to match the necklace almost exactly, so a postal scale or a suspicious hand testing the parcel's heft would notice nothing wrong. They wrapped the substitute in a torn fragment of the Paris newspaper Echo de Paris, likely to account for any padding material the original package had used. Then came the detail that makes this a forensic puzzle rather than a simple theft. They resealed the parcel using Silverman's counterfeit wax seal, stamped to mimic Maya's own monogram closely enough to pass a routine glance. The parcel went back into the ordinary delivery chain. Neville, or another carrier, delivered it to Maya that same morning. On schedule, seals apparently intact, nothing about its outward appearance suggesting it had ever left the postal system's control. Maya broke the seals himself. That's worth pausing on. The theft was designed so that the one person capable of authenticating those seals, the man who had used that exact wax stamp for years, would be the one to unknowingly certify that nothing had happened. He opened his own parcel and found sugar. For a long moment, the mechanics of the crime made it feel almost unsolvable. No forced entry. No witnesses to a theft, because from the outside there wasn't one, just a parcel that traveled its normal route and arrived, apparently, unmolested. The only physical evidence Scotland Yard had to work with was the parcel itself, the newspaper wrapping, the sugar, and the seals. And that, as we're about to see, was exactly enough. Chief Inspector Alfred Ward caught the case, and Ward was, in his own way, as methodical a figure as Grizzard was. Ward had built his career from humble beginnings in the newly formed detective branch of the Metropolitan Police, cutting his teeth on some of Victorian London's most difficult murder investigations. Lloyd's, facing what was at the time the largest jewelry claim in its history, assembled a special underwriting committee headed by Montague Evans to work alongside Ward's team. A £10,000 reward was announced for the necklace's return, a figure large enough to loosen tongues across London's criminal underworld. The initial theory was straightforward, and it was almost entirely useless. Theft during transit, likely in France, possibly involving corrupt postal staff on the continent. It pointed nowhere. There was no sign of interference before the parcel reached England. Reversal 1. The case turned on the seal, not the sugar. Investigators eventually located an engraver who admitted, under questioning, that he had been hired to produce a counterfeit version of Maya's personal seal. That single piece of evidence collapsed the stolen-in-transit theory entirely. If the seal had been forged in London, the substitution happened in London, which meant the thieves had inside knowledge of exactly how Maya's parcels moved through the postal system, and access to someone close enough to intercept one. Ward's investigation moved toward the network of Hatton Garden dealers and fencers who might have both the skill and the criminal contacts to pull this off. Grizzard's name would have surfaced early. His reputation as the king of fences made him a natural suspect for any operation this ambitious, but reputation is not evidence, and Ward needed more than instinct. Reversal 2. The thieves' own attempt to sell the pearls became the trap. About a month after the theft, two Paris-based jewel brokers, Samuel Brandstatter and Maya Cohen-Quadratstein, contacted Lloyd's directly. They had been approached, they said, by men trying to quietly move a string of pearls matching Maya's description, and they offered to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for the reward. Over the following weeks, Brandstatter and Quadratstein met repeatedly with the thieves, ostensibly to verify the pearls' authenticity, building trust and gathering the details Ward's team needed. They brought in a third man, pearl merchant Max Spanier, to pose as a genuine buyer. Spanier met Grizzard directly and purchased two of the pearls using marked banknotes whose serial numbers had been recorded in advance by police. This is the moment the case stopped being about a forged seal and started being about physical, traceable evidence connecting Joseph Grizzard, by name, to pearls that could only have come from Maya's necklace. Reversal 3. The arrest didn't recover the necklace, and nearly cost the case everything. On September 2, 1913, police sprang their trap at a London Underground station, arresting Grizzard, Silverman, Lockett, and Gutworth. A fifth man, Daniel McCarthy, was also initially detained but later discharged. It should have been the resolution. It wasn't. None of them were carrying the necklace, and searches turned up nothing. Ward had strong circumstantial and forensic evidence: the forged seal, the marked banknotes, testimony from Brandstatter and Quadratstein. But the centerpiece of the entire case, the physical necklace itself, was still missing. Without it, a defense could argue there was no proof that the pearls sold to Spanier had ever been part of Maya's necklace at all. At this point, how would you have tried to prove the case? With the forgery evidence you had but no necklace in hand? Drop your theory in the comments. 2 weeks later, the missing piece arrived by accident. A piano maker named Augustus Horn was walking to work in Highbury when he saw a man deliberately drop a small object in the gutter and hurry away. Horn opened it, a matchbox containing a broken string of pearls. Assuming they were cheap imitations, he handed one to a local street child to use as a marble and turned the rest over to police as a minor curiosity. It was only when the pearls reached Scotland Yard's Lost Property Office, and a sharp-eyed detective examined them, that they were identified as genuine. All but one or two of the pearls from Maya's necklace, apparently discarded in panic by a gang member's wife after the arrests, afraid of being caught holding the evidence. And now, with the forged seal traced, the marked banknotes accounted for, and the necklace itself recovered almost intact, the entire case came down to one room, the dock at the Old Bailey.
Here's the thing about this case that I keep coming back to.
Grizzard, Lockett, Silverman, and Gutworth never took the stand. Not one of them testified, not one of them explained how the theft was carried out, and to this day, some of the operational details, exactly who physically opened the parcel, exactly how the pearls were divided afterward, remain undocumented because the men who knew chose silence over confession, all the way to sentencing.
That silence tells you something about who Grizzard was. This wasn't a man who panicked.
Contemporary accounts describe him as consistently composed, smiling through a police raid on his own home, calmly finishing a bowl of soup with stolen diamonds sitting at the bottom of it while officers searched the house around him. The Pearl robbery wasn't an act of desperation. It was, by every account, close to recreational for him. A puzzle he wanted to solve, executed with the same patience he'd used to build a criminal reputation Scotland Yard had never managed to make stick. And that's what makes the postman detail so unsettling, more than the theft itself. Grizzard didn't threaten Neville.
He didn't need to.
He spent time with him, learned his habits, made himself familiar enough that a bribe felt like the natural next step rather than a crime. The entire operation depended on exploiting ordinary trust, Maya's trust in the postal system, Neville's willingness to be quietly corrupted, and, most of all, the industry-wide assumption that a plain brown parcel was safer than an armed courier.
Grizzard didn't break that system.
He read it correctly, and then he used it exactly as designed, just for the wrong purpose. Silverman's role deserves its own attention. Forging a seal well enough to fool its daily user isn't a smash-and-grab skill. It's close, patient, technical work, and it's the single piece of evidence that unraveled the theft-in-transit theory and pointed Ward's investigation back toward London. In a case with almost no forensic evidence in the modern sense, no fingerprints, no physical struggle, nothing left at a crime scene because there was no crime scene in the traditional sense, the forged seal functioned as the closest thing to a signature the gang left behind. I genuinely find something uncomfortable in how close this case came to succeeding completely. If the necklace hadn't been dropped in a gutter in Highbury, if Horne had kept walking, or the pearls had ended up melted into someone's private collection rather than back in police hands, the forgery evidence and the marked banknotes might have proven a conspiracy without ever proving the theft was complete. Ward's case wasn't won by brilliant deduction alone. It needed a moment of pure, unearned luck to close the loop. That's not usually how these documentaries end, and it's worth being honest about it here. At the Old Bailey, the case built from the forged seal, the marked banknotes, and the testimony of Brandstatter and Quadratstein held. Joseph Grizzard and James Lockett were sentenced to 7 years, Grizzard's longest sentence in a criminal career built almost entirely on never getting caught.
Simon Silverman received 5 years.
Lisa Gutworth, the least central figure among the four, was sentenced to 18 months of hard labor. Daniel McCarthy, initially arrested alongside the others, was discharged. Almost the entire necklace was recovered, all but 1 or 2 pearls, permanently lost, including the one handed to a street child in Highbury to use as a marble, an ending so small and strange it's easy to forget it happened at all. The Great Pearl Robbery became one of the most famous crimes of Edwardian England, not because of violence, there was none, but because of what it exposed. An industry worth millions of pounds had been routinely trusting the postal service with its most valuable goods, on the assumption that anonymity was security. This case proved that assumption catastrophically wrong, and in its wake, the jewelry trade moved decisively toward insured couriers, tighter registered mail protocols, and far more skepticism about what an intact wax seal actually guarantees. Grizzard's name still carries weight in the history of British crime, less for the scale of what he stole than for how quietly he nearly got away with it. Alfred Ward's case proved that even a theft with almost no traditional forensic trace, no scene, no struggle, no obvious evidence, could still be built on one small, verified detail at a time. A forged seal, a marked banknote, a matchbox in a gutter. The necklace itself, reassembled, went on. The questions about exactly how those final hours in Silverman's office played out did not. If you enjoyed this true crime documentary, consider subscribing to Enter the Crime.